Hello, I'm Carl Yulin Halverson, and you are watching Living Green on a Blue Planet. Tonight we're going to continue following the students in the 2023 Allen County, Indiana Master Naturalist Program. And the class tonight is being held at Metea County Park, and they're going to be learning about being nature interpreters. And so natural interpretation is not about interpreting or converting one language to another, but rather helping people put the experiences that they're having into context. So if you're studying Eagle Marsh, you're studying a restored wetland, a cornfield before that, the settlers, the whole canal system, the Miami Indians, and the glacier before that. Lots of putting things into context. So tonight we're going to hear from a member of the Miami Nation who's going to help us understand that the culture is based on living with nature, being part of nature. She's going to explain their sense of time, their lunar calendar, and how it influences their behaviors. And then we're going to hear from a Civil War reenactor. And as fascinating as it is, it's not really about the Civil War for the students. It's about the process of being a nature interpreter. How you take data and facts and turn it into something living and alive and of interest so that people can put their feet in someone else's shoes a little bit and kind of understand and help them form questions and guesses and hypotheses. And so it's a pretty interesting night. It's a very different change from plants and animals, but at the same time it's touched by plants and animals. And so tonight, nature interpretation at Metea Park.
He has an MBA from California State University. He was owner. I didn't know about that.
I haven't done that for a long time.
Okay. Okay. He's been a naturalist at Metro Parks in Akron, Ohio. He's been employed as a naturalist and educator in numerous places around the United States. Listen to this: Evansville, St. John's Island in South Carolina, Medora, North Dakota, Naples, Florida. I mean, this man has had a lot of interesting experiences and jobs. He's been a life member of the National Association of Interpretation since 1980. He has served in various leadership positions with this organization and has received several honors. So this is what brings him with us here tonight as an interpreter. Bob Dispenza.
A little bit about the National Association for Interpretation. That is our professional organization. People who do this for a living, a lot of them are in it. I think it's between 6,000 and 7,000 members in the U.S. so far. State park people, local park people, people who have their own businesses, national parks, people in other countries. So that's kind of the organization I've been associated with for a long time. Anything else? During the presentation, you may have questions that will come up. By all means, ask them. Now, this is going to be broken down into two parts. You guys are becoming essentially master naturalists. Another word for naturalist is a natural and cultural history interpreter. People, when you think of interpreter, they think someone speaking a different language or sign language or something, but that's not how it's used in this context. It is natural and cultural history interpretation. You're being familiarized a lot with the natural history of the whole thing, and I'll be involved in that next month. But this is the cultural history side. So there's people that do both, there's people that do only one, there's people that do only the other. Being on a small staff in most of my positions, we can't afford to specialize too much. So you got to do all kinds of things. And in my position, I do everything from tomorrow I have a story hour at the library. Next week we're going to be planning a prescribed book. We do invasive exotics control. We do off-site programs. Later next month I'll be doing a caving program with homeschool, where we're going to go down to Buckner and near Bloomington and cave down there. So there's all kinds of recreational things, natural history things, all kinds of stuff. Now, some people will say, Civil War history, it's like people killing each other. I don't think I want to hear about that too much. But the Civil War was a turning point in the history of this country, and for 100 years afterwards, things the promise that it gave 100 years ago didn't get fulfilled until 100 years later. And there are people who were fighting. The first part is going to be me just talking about stuff. And then I'm going to go and do a first-person living history. Some of you are familiar with first-person living history, where a person portrays someone from history or someone from that time period. And when I usually use my hat as the indicator, and my taking glasses off because these are period glasses. When I had that hat on, I become William Clark Allen, who he lived over near Lafayette. He was a member of the 72nd Indiana Infantry and fought in a number of places. He left behind voluminous letters to his family, so we know a lot about his life, and I have some quotes from some of those letters that I'll be reading later on after we're done. When I'm doing the first-person living history interpretation, I don't know anything about cars or McDonald's or other things like that. And you're going to have to suspend reality in two things, at least I am. You're going to have to pretend that I don't have gray hair and a gray beard. I actually, at one point, for some of the programs I did, dyed my beard a different color, and my wife thought, nah, so I stopped doing it. And then I'm going to have to suspend reality that I am inside a room with electric lights and a bunch of people dressed like this and plastic chairs and stuff like that. So it goes both ways. William Clark Allen will not know anything about the modern stuff, but you can ask him all kinds of questions about life as in the Army during the Civil War, what kind of things he did, any questions you have about that time period. He can answer those. He can answer the other stuff. I need to get so that's going to be, basically the premise is that he is on leave right now. He has come back to Indiana, and some of the people that his neighbors know and his friends know want to know what's happening on the front and what kind of things he's doing and what kind of things he has with him and just life in general in the Army. A lot of people were in it. Somewhere around 3 million people in the country served in the various armies during the Civil War. And of those, 700,000 died. And more than half of those, a large number, were from disease, not from just getting sick, from country boys going in with city boys, and city boys always having all these diseases that they're relatively immune to because they've been around people their whole life, and all the weaklings in the city already died. So they get together with the country people who haven't been exposed to this thing, and tuberculosis, measles, and mumps, and childhood diseases we don't think about much, but just people would die in droves. So he will talk about the things he has with him, a little bit about fighting, a little bit about questions that you have about his work in the Civil War. We're aiming for about 1864 or so. The war's not over yet. And so there's still fighting going on. He's on leave, so he'll have to go back to his unit after this. And that's where any questions before we get started? Yeah.
So I'm not from Indiana. I didn't learn Indiana history. I learned New England history as a kid. I don't quite know Indiana's place in the Civil War.
Indiana supplied more than 100 full regiments to the Union Army. That's 1,000 people about in a regiment, depending on when they were recruited and how many people were. And there were more than 100 of those. I think they went up to 121. So there were a lot. Okay. And the main thing, I do different characters. I do this one once in a while. When I go to reenactments, I'm usually Union Navy. And the first question we get is, what Navy? And so we have a lot of education to do with that. I do an early Indiana settler who arrived here about 1815 and talk about that. I used to do it in Ohio. There isn't a whole lot of difference between them. When I was in Florida, I did a plume hunter at the National Audubon Society Sanctuary I worked at. So there's various living history things that I've done, various historical periods. This is just one of them. And so there's a lot of ins and outs to doing cultural history interpretation. I can get away with this. I would never presume to do anything with Native Americans. I am not one of them, and I don't speak for them. But I can, with relatives being in the country, speak for people who served in the Civil War. We have folks here that have relatives that were fighting in the war, and they know where they are and what happened to them. So, and if you feel the need to like get up and stretch, go ahead and do that. And if you want to stand up in front of the camera, you can do that. I won't be in front of the camera. Anything else before we get started? Okay, we're about to take a trip back to 1864 or so. I never liked it anyway. Well, I never thought that my family would get this many people together to ask about what I'm doing in the war, but I'm more than willing to talk about it if you'd like to know more about it. I brought my blanket roll with me and put it out here. I'm not going to leave any of my supplies and equipment with the unit while I'm gone because none of it will be there when I get back. So I'm bringing it with me where I go, which means bringing it back here. And I will be done with my leave in another week, and I have to go take the train back down south to Georgia, where the unit is right now. A couple of things to know if any of you are thinking of joining the Army. You'll be marching a lot, so you better get used to it. Better have good shoes. Remember that when the government issues you a uniform, it comes in two sizes. Too big and too small. One of the things they'll be issuing you also on occasion is rations. So some of you may not have seen these before. You can pass them around. That is what we call in the Army hardtack. And the best thing to do with it is to soak it in coffee before you eat it, or because you don't want to break your teeth. And if it has insects in it, they'll come out and then they'll float to the top, and you can either skim them off or you can eat. And once in a while we'll get some old pork or maybe some bacon with a little bit of mold on it. That's why I like coming home. We get real food here. Some of the things we'll be also issued on occasion is a gum blanket, like this one, which has a hole in it so you can wear it when it's raining. And we were in Georgia, and close to Georgia, and it rained 17 days in a row. So this was one of my best friends. Nothing ever dried out then either. That's one of the things you pack up with your blanket roll. Some of the soldiers will have a backpack. Nice big backpack. I just roll a lot of this up in the blanket and tie it on the ends with this, like this. And that's where I keep everything. It's a little easier to carry, and it doesn't encumber you as much if you have to run. Your canteen will be your best friend. The cloth on the outside you can keep wet, and when it evaporates, it cools off the water, so that works. Some of the water we've been drinking I'm a little suspicious of, but you can't be a chooser when you're marching along and you're thirsty. Take what there is. I carry my own mess stuff, but the unit, my buddies in the regiment, some of them will carry a pot or a pan or a coffee pot, so I don't have to carry everything. Very important to have that. This came from my family. They send me things on occasion besides letters. And put that in various places to keep you from chafing. And they send, of course, some patch material so that I can sew on patches on my shirts or wherever else has a hole. Because the government will issue you a certain amount of uniform equipment, and you have to keep it for as long as they're going to let you have it. And that means fixing it. Some of those city boys, I don't think they've ever sewed anything. Speaking of city boys, Some of them have extra money that they need to be relieved of. And I believe what I heard from a fellow from another unit, he said it's morally wrong to allow suckers to keep their money. So, that's where my greenbacks came from. Is city boys who think they know how to play cards and dice. But you can't let the officers catch you doing that. They don't approve of gambling. I also got this from a prisoner. That is a Confederate piece of money. That's hardly worth the paper it's printed on. I think there's some folks in the north that have been using this as wallpaper. Might as well. Matches, gotta have matches. And this was useful for a while, tooth powder. But at some point on my trip north, my toothbrush fell out of my blanket roll. So I'm using my finger right there. But it still works. And of course, got to be presentable with what hair I have left. Made from so it was given to me by one of the family members, made from the horn of a cow. Soap, you can see it's not been opened. Usually when we want to get the cleanest is when we have a river crossing. That's when you get the cleanest. You just soak your whole self in. My family also made sure that I had a book to be able to write notes in and send letters. Sending letters is very important, sending and receiving letters. Every once in a while I will get one from the family, and every once in a while I get the opportunity to send them. And that is the highlight of anyone's week, is to get, or especially get a letter, not just send them. And it takes up a lot of room, and it's a little bit heavier than I would like, but if a fellow is going to have one book, it is going to be, that's it. This one is a polyglot version. And fortunately, my young eyes can still read that. Some of the older folks have a little trouble with that. One of the things I also carry besides hardtack and rations, this goes over my other shoulder, and this is my ration bag, and it has a liner that is buttoned in. Because if you're carrying something greasy like bacon or something like that and it gets melty in there, you can pull the liner out and wash it separately. This, you don't want to wash this treated cloth too much or it stops being waterproof.
Is that waxed canvas?
This is with boiled linseed oil and lamp black. Is how that's waterproof. The other one here, this is a gum blanket. It's got India rubber or some kind of thing in it. But you can get, this is where the rations go usually, and sometimes the things you eat have something wet. Now, I'm going to get myself suited up as I would be if I was going to go out on campaign, not with the blanket roll, but with everything else. And the first thing that goes on is the cartridge box. Got to make sure that your buckle is right here. The officers and sergeants will get on your case. That's not the case. Bayonet, and that goes over top of the cartridge box. Keep it from flopping around too much. I think I must have to move up a one. I've been home for a week and I've been eating too well. There we go.
So what do you do to keep your feet dry when you're marching in the rain?
Dry?
Yeah.
Dry is not something we frequently run into. Once in a while you can set up, if you're in a camp, you can set up a campfire and take your socks off and dry them off and put your boots close, but not so close that they're going to like catch fire or something. So cartridge box, bayonet, canteen, got to have a canteen. also, one of the things that goes into my bedroll is half of my tent. This has buttons all down the front side of it. And we unbutton it, and my tent mate takes one half in his bedroll, and I take the other half. And when we set up camp, we button our two halves together, and we will go find tent poles in the woods and stakes, just wherever we happen to be. There's going to be wood around. We're not marching in the desert, so we should be able to find something to be able to put that together. And there's some lines attached to it that we can stretch out a little bit.
But, question, that doesn't feel waterproof either.
Well, if you bump into it too much, it's not. You've got to just not bump into it. It's canvas, and if you lean against it while you're sleeping or roll over, you're going to get wet. But we have a nice wool blanket to keep us warm even if it gets a little bit wet. Sometimes that's not enough, though. Sometimes your tent mate and yourself just have to get warm however you can. Sometimes that involves getting a little close together. Some of the older folks, especially in the South, where they couldn't afford to issue new rifles to their men, would bring whatever they had from home. And this is kind of a little bit demonstration how the muzzleloader works, because I don't carry a muzzleloader. I carry a different kind of rifle, a more modern rifle. But for ones like this, you have a paper cartridge you would take out of here, tear the top off. That's one of the requirements to get into the Army, is you have two teeth opposite each other so you can tear a cartridge. The other two, to be able to get into the Army, you have to be able to do two things: fog a mirror, cast a shadow. If you can do those, you're in. Unless you're a woman. There's been some of them that have been drummed out of regiments because they've been joining the Army posing as men, and eventually they get found out. And then they have to go home. But you tear the cartridge, dump the powder in, drop the bullet in, the ramrod out, shove it all the way down, make sure it's all the way down. And when you put it back, you got to keep your hand out of the way, because this could potentially go off at any time. And if you do this, it will not end well. And if it's a cap lock, all you have to do is pull this back, take a cap out of your cap box, which is right here usually, stick it on there, and it's ready to go. This one's a flintlock, so you would need to have two different powder horns, one which is powder for here and one which is powder for here. And it takes a long time to load these, at least about, if you're really, really fast, you might be able to get it done in 20 seconds. If you're a little slower, it might be 30 seconds. So this is what some of the folks had to deal with when they were at. It shoots really accurately, but it also takes forever to load. The kind that we have now, and we in the 72nd Indiana, we paid for half of this. A full month's pay went into my purchasing this one, and that was only half the price. But it's a modern firearm in every sense of the word, much more than that. This one uses a cartridge that looks like this. And what you do for this is you take 7 of those and drop them down in here one after the other. And then this causes the spring in here to push a cartridge into there. That loads it into the chamber. Because it's a rimfire cartridge, it doesn't require any kind of primer or any kind of cap. All you do is pull back all the way, fire. For the next load, instead of going through another 20 or 30 seconds, you pull back halfway on the hammer. That kicks out the old cartridge. That puts the new one in. It's ready to fire again. And a good Army fellow who's well trained with a muzzle loading rifle like an Enfield or a Springfield can get a shot off every 20 seconds, so 3 shots a minute. Someone trained with a Spencer like this could get 25 shots off a minute, depending on how fast they use up there. The problem is Most of the folks are issued 60 rounds, and it takes a while to use up 60 rounds with a muzzle loader. You can use up 60 rounds pretty fast with this. And so we need to have a good supply train and have lots of ammunition where we can go get it easily, or we'll just have to leave the field because we run out. It was a very big surprise at Hoover's Gap when we went through there, and one of the tactics that the Confederates use, and the Union for that matter, is to draw fire. They will see us ready and aim, and then they will drop down. We'll fire, and then they know it takes us another 20 seconds to reload. They'll jump up and charge. That works with one of those. You might be able to make it to the line before they can reload. It doesn't work with one of these. We would fire, they would drop down, they'd get up, we'd fire again. So they were kind of big surprised about that, and they retreated pretty quickly, and we chased them all the way down 7 miles of Hoover's Gap, and then held the end of the gap against countercharges by a number of Confederate regiments because they thought we were armed like they were, and we weren't. The Lightning Brigade that we're part of, Colonel Wilder is from Indianapolis. He's the one, he was into manufacturing or some kind before the war. He's the one that put up collateral for the loan that we got to be able to get these. And then we paid for half of it ourselves. So it gave us a lot of firepower in a very small package. And so we really like it. And there's some units that instead of a medal or a promotion, the commanders will award especially deserving soldiers one of these instead of that. Helps keep you alive longer.
How much money do you make?
$15 a month.
How much does that cost?
That was, well, my part of it was $15. So
Okay.
that was a
Okay.
month's
So
pay.
it's a month's pay.
And you know, some of the folks that have more money might have a watch or something like that. That'll cost you 2 months' pay for a good watch. I don't have anything like that. Besides, what do I need to know what time it is for? Sun's up, we're marching. Sun goes down, we're setting up camp, or digging a trench, most likely.
Do you get to keep that when the war is done?
That's been unclear right now. I'm not sure whether we'll have to pay the rest of it or not, but it could be when the war's over, they'll have so many that are sitting around that we might be able to just take it home with us.
What distance will that shoot?
Reliably out to about 400 yards. Some of the muskets, the muzzle-loading ones, they're sighted out to 800 yards. The sights will go that far. Whether they'll actually hit something at that distance is another matter. And there are some Sharps rifles that are sighted out to 800 yards that actually will hit something at 800 yards. These are not quite that accurate, but for the amount of distance that we normally can see through the woods or across a field, this will do just fine. And so it helps keep us in the field longer against larger groups. Larger armies will come at us and not be able to dislodge us because we have the firepower to keep them at a distance.
What caliber is it?
52. The round is called, I've seen on the outside of the box, it's called 52 Henry. Or not Henry, 52 Spencer.